So, Kerry McAvoy, thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you so much for giving your time and expertise to this because it is an absolutely newsworthy subject to take on. And first, tell people who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. These days, I'm a retired psychologist, but I had a private practice for over 20 plus years where I saw all sorts of issues, from general problems, depression, relationship issues. I also saw a lot of new moms for postpartum depression. But I also then saw my fair share of personality disorders that crossed the board. But in 2015, I was widowed, so I closed my practice and I got into a new relationship, a new marriage, and I knew the person I'd met was narcissistic, but I didn't realize because we never covered the damaging effect that toxic personalities have on people in the context of relationships. So after I got out of that relationship in 2019, I really turned my focus and became extremely fascinated in the effects of personality disorders on people, on relationships, and started to make that my new specialty. So since then, I've done a lot more continuing education and training about narcissistic abuse.
Yes. And thank God for that because a lot of people don't understand it.
Right.
And that's why I'm here and we're doing this. And I gratefully got you to agree to participate in this interview. So, what are the dangers of people not knowing how to identify narcissistic, psychopathic, and pathologically predatory, manipulative people in everyday life?
Yeah, we really severely underestimate the impact predatory tactics and manipulations can have on a person. And there's two pieces that we minimize. One, we don't know how to spot them. So we
Right.
don't realize that there's actually psychological maneuvers that create a sense of trust and
Yes.
lowers our boundaries as well as lowers our guard to these individuals. And that there's a form of, I mean, oh, this sounds really extreme, but there's actually a form of mind control that can occur that where we do things out of tap into our defensiveness, and then it's almost like a compulsion to correct a person or compulsion to increase access to us, and that
Yeah.
makes us very vulnerable. The other problem is that when people are in these relationships and there's a lot of exploitation happen, that to the public, to most of us, we think that it always takes two to tango, that there's a equal and fair responsibility of both participants in this relationship. What we fail to understand is that when there's someone who's actually keeping a sense of themselves and what their ulterior motive is at a hidden level, a secret level,
Yes.
that can really warp the relationship and create an extremely imbalanced power dynamic, that they're extremely vulnerable in that moment.
Yes, exactly. And that is the point where there is one perpetrator and then there is a target. It is not
Yes,
a takes two to tango. And I do
right.
see often people trying to paint it as just a toxic situation or a toxic relationship when that's in no way, by any stretch of the imagination, what's going on. This is not a tit for tat situation.
Exactly, exactly. We end up thinking because of our emphasis on equity and independence and that everybody can kind of pull themselves up by the bootstrap, we then put way too much emphasis on the power dynamic, assuming there's equity between both participants when there really is not. It's terribly unfair, but we don't see that as a result. Then there becomes another level of trauma that happens to victims in that, or the survivors of these, that they end up becoming victimized by society's lack of understanding and pathologizing of them when simply they're the recipient of what's happened.
That is exactly what I was going to ask you about next, is especially for the person being targeted and isolated when institutions or other community members that you would seek help for, like with, they don't understand or they don't believe they need to understand this relentless and damaging form of abuse, how it's total. It's on the brain, the
Yeah.
nervous system. It neurologically destroys you, it spiritually destroys you. And often that is weaponized. It's physical, it's relational, it's financial. That's
Yeah.
a part of the coercive control, and it's
Yeah.
very well hidden.
It is really well hidden. And there is this, like I said, this assumption that it must be on the victim. There's a fascinating book by Don Hennessy called How He Gets Into Her Head. Hennessy is part of an Irish law enforcement team, and they spent a long time trying to find the common denominators among victims. They kept thinking there must be something all these individuals are doing that sets them up for vulnerability or makes it difficult for them to leave, and they
Right.
couldn't find a single quality. They searched all this research and they weren't finding the variable. I know that Sandra Brown in 2014 at a Purdue University did something similar, looking at 600 pathological love relationships. But what
Yes.
Don Hennessy's team came back was when they shifted the focus from the victim to the predator, suddenly the common variable fell into view. And the common variable was the tactics predatory people do that then get people into a relationship. And his comment, and I loved it, it's in the early part of the book. His comment is to those who say, or kind of naysayers, and I don't believe that. I really think there's something wrong with the victims. He said, because it's never happened to me, maybe it's just a boundary problem. What he said to them was, lucky you just haven't met a sophisticated enough predator. Because what happens in these dynamics is these individuals churn through a lot of relationships. The predatory mindset ends up having a lot of victims and getting a lot of practice. And over time, they tend to get better. Years
Right.
ago, back in graduate school, I got to work with, they brought in an expert who was looking at typing and tracking predatory people in California. And he said that he noticed that there's actually a course of uh, psychological kind of strategy that developed, that they actually had a trajectory and they could predict this person was going to move in a certain direction and become even more dangerous down the road to other people. And sure enough, they'd see that play out. They see these individuals start at point A and then move to B, C, eventually F, D. Eventually some of them would end up in trouble with the law because of what they were doing was cross the boundaries of legalities.
Right. And if they have a lot of resources,
Yeah.
then they can escape that a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
times.
that's the other piece that you're bringing in. It's fascinating is that these individuals, because consider, let's just kind of pull the lens back. So what happens in a predatory relationship is the person who's predatory is calculated, they're emotionally detached. There's a part of themselves that's not very invested in the relationship, so they have less skin in the game.
Right.
That because the other person is being targeted, so that they're controlling the dynamic, but the
Yes.
victim is being swamped, psychologically overwhelmed, feels discombobulated, feels destroyed by what they're experiencing, and they then have a reaction, a traumatic reaction. So they become more dysfunctional, and their ecosystem becomes decompensates.
Yeah.
The things that they had as a strength no longer are strengths. It's starting to become it's becoming undone. So
Yeah.
you get into this presentation to the public, like the legal system, like when the judges try to determine who is telling the truth or where does custody belong. You've got the predatory person who's calm,
Yeah.
collected, in
Yeah.
charge. The power sits with them. They've been
Yes.
rewriting the narrative. Meanwhile, the victim is scattered, feels emotionally distraught, terribly upset, very traumatized,
Yes.
and they then present as dysfunctional, which makes
Right.
everybody think that the calm, collected person is the functional person and must be telling the truth about the victim, but
Yeah.
failing to consider how this dynamic plays out. That anybody, say God forbid you had an employer who hired you and then um, embezzled the money and couldn't pay you payroll and you're trying to make rent, you're going to be pretty distraught.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, that employer is going to look pretty together as they create a new story, explain why they did what they did. So if we pull the lens back and kind of put it in another situation, we can see why victims often feel less believable, why we struggle to see them as really as the one who needs our support and sympathy.
Yeah, exactly. And that gets missed a lot. And in the shock of it all, you're trying to work through the traumatic cognitive dissonance, the
Yeah,
fact that you've been love leveraged, trust leveraged,
yeah,
everything you've ever been told is a lie. You've got these massive betrayals coming in from people you loved and trusted the
right.
most that have only ever been exploiting you. And they look at you being destabilized and stalked and slandered, smear campaigns where they reach out to everyone who will possibly listen
Yeah,
and get people to gang up on you.
yeah, yeah.
a lot of people don't realize, they think that this cannot happen to them, that could never possibly be a victim of a manipulator, because I think that's what makes people a really great candidate for experiencing it, actually, is to believe that it can't happen to them.
Yeah, I do too. I think it does increase your vulnerability. And I also know there's another myth. So I totally agree with you. That is a common myth, is that because it hasn't happened, or at least you haven't recognized it, therefore you're somehow exempt from it happening to you.
Right.
That's not true. Ever,
Yeah.
talk to Bernie Madoff's victims and ask how many of them ever thought, and a lot of them are investments, and yet he still fooled them.
Right.
A lot of them would say they never saw it coming because what he presented was plausible, made sense. Or take on even Enron, or all these big things that ever have happened, that where lots of people got affected, lots of people lost a lot of money or were profoundly damaged as a result of it.
Right.
I think the thing that we get wrong about these individuals is that it's not about boundaries. And there's another big error, is if we could just have good enough boundaries, this would never happen. The problem with this individual is that these are boundary bullies. I love that term. I just recently came across it with Terry Cole, is that these
Yes.
individuals really are very sophisticated at using things that are normal hospitality rules that most of us follow, and
Right.
then using it in a way to set you up and use it against you.
Yes.
For example, that's a common one, is that, and I often say this, is that say that you say I don't respond to texts after 8 p.m. at night, they'll text you at 8:01
Yeah.
or 7:59, knowing that this is not going to be a simple 1 minute conversation. And when you then set the boundary around, I didn't respond, then the comeback was, oh my goodness, well, it was just 8 o'clock and you can't be there when I need you. And so it comes back to, it causes you to then be in a dilemma between your integrity and
Yes.
what's good for you versus the person you want to be as a reasonable, supportive, available person to other people. So they're very good at pinching us or corralling us into spots where we have to betray ourselves, either betray our rule or betray our integrity. And
Yes.
these are the things that people don't understand, is that that's why it makes it really tough, is because you always walk out a loser in these relationships. There is
Yes.
no win in these relationships.
No, it's a zero-sum game from beginning to end that you
Yeah,
never held your hand up for participation. And
exactly.
weaponizing your values against you is
Exactly.
so often why they tend to put themselves in elevated positions of like spiritual power or things like that, because that that creates that power imbalance right off the bat, that
Right.
dynamic. And Darvo and smear campaigns, the way that they can turn everything completely on its head and make the person being decimated,
Yeah.
you know, look like the perpetrator, and they'll claim to be the savior, the hero, the helper, and make you the toxic one. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
terrifying
It
how they
really is.
can twist
It is.
everything.
It really is, because we don't essentially ask ourselves this critical question whenever we listen to something. And this is what we should always be doing, with regardless of who the speaker is, whoever the narrator is. Ask ourselves, what is the possible secondary gains to what they're saying to me? And I'm saying that about everybody,
Yeah,
to ask ourselves about, and then ask, what's the track history around that individual that either will support what they're saying or actually is in contradiction of it?
right.
Do they burn through other relationships? Do they keep people in their lives? What their work history? What their love history? I think if we pull the lens back again and ask ourselves to sort of get up at the map level, we can then start to see that there's maybe a bigger problem. Somebody just recently I had an interview with somebody just recently, and this person seemed to be a reputable person. And as I'm interviewing them, they said something that I thought was really strange. They
Uh-huh.
said to me, one of my kids has gone no contact with me for 3 years. I'm thinking, if you're a very emotionally astute person, now, can that happen? Sure, it can happen, but not very likely, because emotionally available parents tend to maintain relationships with their kids in a way that work through difficulties. But one of your kids has gone no contact and it's been persistent for 3 years. What does that mean? And sure enough, it was shortly later that I found out there was more information about this person that really put a lot of what they said into question. But when we get that kind of uncomfortable, awkward funny feeling about something, we should pause and
Yeah.
say, what else could this be about? And learn to reserve our judgment. Too often of us think that we should trust somebody and give them the benefit of the doubt until we have reasons not to. What we don't realize is that that's actually a form of blind trust, that we should
Yes.
move into every relationship asking people to earn our respect and trust and to hold that in kind of almost in abeyance until there's proof that they are who they say they are, and then slowly like allow them more access, more credibility over time, and to
Yeah.
watch for things that just leave us uneasy and see those as things we should follow up on.
Absolutely. And for a lot of people, that did have parents that end up you going no contact with due to constant predation and
Yeah,
exploitation
yeah,
and these exact same patterns. It can take decades of your life before you recognize what you've been put through, what
yeah.
how to recognize these things. If it's your normal, it's your malignant normal.
Yes, it becomes a normal, like what it's normal doesn't mean it's healthy. And I think of too
Right.
often we think normal means healthy, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it means it's all you know.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much for clarifying that and about survivors not being believed, and also why being trauma informed is just not enough. Why we must become predator informed, because there's so much language being used about around being trauma informed, but I'm sorry, sitting down with someone doing internal family systems work when you're in 1,000 fragmented pieces is not going to protect you in the here and now when you're
Yeah.
dealing with things like this. And I just don't feel like I feel like the word trauma informed is used so frequently it's lost its meaning.
Yeah, I do too. Trauma informed to me, what I take that to mean, and then I'm thinking of all those that I know do the work in this arena. That means that
Hmm.
you're aware of what happens to the fight or flight system in our nervous system. That's all that it
Yes.
really means. It doesn't mean that you're a betrayal specialist.
Right.
And these relationships are actually about betrayal.
Yeah.
They're betrayal trauma. They're not just trauma. Trauma includes everything. That's from those who saw action in military events, from those who've been, maybe I had a patient who survived like a 40 car pileup. I mean, it can talk about a lot of stuff,
Right.
but or even the little T's, just the slight neglects or misses that we have in our life. But that's all trauma.
Hmm.
But this is something different. This is about this is a chronic pattern of betrayal and duplicity, deception. And that's why I mean, is narcissistic abuse the real right word? There's a lot of clinicians out there that don't like that terminology. They think it should have been something else. Well, unfortunately, we've adopted it publicly. I think,
Right.
but that what I like about that is that it captures a unique interpersonal dynamic that's different than other interpersonal dynamics. And I think we should put it in its own category like that. So whether or not you look for somebody who's betrayal trauma informed or somebody who's certified in narcissistic abuse, to me, that's what people should be start to pay attention to. And the good news is there are two programs out now, one through Sandra Brown, as well as through Dr. Ramani Durvasola. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but Dr.
Mhm.
Ramani is also offering a certification so that you can now start to soon look for those who have certification in these arenas.
Yeah, I was aware of Dr. Sandra L. Brown's and also the 5 distinctions of personality types that predators actually look to exploit in others.
Yeah.
And across the board, the targets score off the charts and
Mm,
agreeableness and conscientiousness
yeah.
and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Blindly
love her
trusting.
work.
Yeah. I do too. I do too.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
incredible.
She really is.
And I mean, what can we do to protect ourselves and others, and just allowing people to know what pathologically predatory people are like, especially when these con artists wear masks of altruism or spiritual authority or
Yeah.
of any kind. I mean, they're in, it doesn't matter who you think they are. What they're interested in is their self-concept and their image management worship.
Yeah, exactly.
And, they can be masquerading as a healthy family when underneath it is sadism, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy across the board.
Right.
how can we possibly protect ourselves and be in support of others who have been victims of coercive control, which is demonstrably destructive
Yes.
to the entirety of the soul of a human being? Because what's
Yeah.
being done, there's no humanity about it.
Right.
It's all
Right.
about image management.
It really is. I think that's a good way of putting it. I think the way for us to protect ourselves better is to just realize that roughly 1 in 5 individuals, maybe it's roughly six, but 1 in 5, 1 in 6 individuals is predatory. And
Yes.
that's a shocking number. But if you start to think about the fact that the 20% of the population, if you, how do I get there? This is how I get there. I take the government statistics, the latest statistics, and
Yeah.
of each cluster B group and add them all up,
Right.
and that comes up roughly to 20%. Now, granted, there will be some co-occurrence. I know that, but still, I think it's fair to think. It's just helpful to think possibly 1 in 5 people. So when you're with somebody, start to ask yourself, have they earned my trust?
Right.
Are they doing stuff that minimizes me? Do they really show up and give me space? Is there reciprocity in this relationship? Am I allowed to say no? What happens when I set a boundary?
Right.
Um, and when I do a psychological miss with this individual, is there effort to repair the relationship? How much accommodation am I emotionally doing for this individual? Do I feel like I'm more and can be expansive, or am I shrinking in this relationship? I think
Right.
these are big signs that we can pay attention. Basically, what I'm saying is ask ourselves about safety. How much personal safety is in this relationship? And I think we
Yes.
get better tuning into our own gut, our own warning system. We can start to feel like when something feels off or not quite right, or we can't be ourselves, we need to learn to respect that as a possible warning sign. This person may have some difficulty, at least traits that are causing a loss of us feeling able to be safely ourselves.
Hmm. And the looking for intermittent reinforcement, because that's one of the first
Yeah,
destabilizing parts of like a feigned kindness or care mixed in with cruelty and projections and really confusing dynamics to take you off center, especially if you're in a position of vulnerability, if that's being weaponized against you for connection, and then
right.
that it's a lot of mind games, is
It
what they
really
call it.
is. And when they're a communal, more of a hero type narcissist, extremely difficult to spot, extremely
Yes.
so. And those
Yes.
individuals are going to really show up as super pleasant, very helpful, very other focused. What we don't recognize is the secondary gains that they're getting from the focus. And we also don't recognize that there's a lack of depth. This
Right.
person can only go literally 2 millimeters deep in a conversation, but they may check in like, how's your husband doing since surgery, or how's your dog doing, but there's not a really like equal sharing of who they are and following
Yeah.
up about how you're doing emotionally. You'll feel like they're skating across the top of something. It's sort of the surface of things, but they're never going there's no real depth. And it can be difficult, but I think also notice how who's in their life and how close are they to the other people. Are their family close to them? Why or why not? I think you'll
Yeah.
see that there's this odd pattern. They may do well at work, but you're going to find that they don't have great family relationships, or they'll say they're just not close to their family. Or you'll
Mhm.
find that they know a lot of people, but there's no deep friend. So you'll notice this odd pattern, and we should pay attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much,
You're
Carrie,
welcome. You're
for
welcome.
shedding so much light on this really impossibly complex topic that we could talk about for
Yeah,
four and
we
a half
could.
decades and never
Yeah,
get done with the examples, the ins and the outs, and the terrorism that it is. And
yeah.
I just hope that people understand that being in a relationship with a pathologically predatory person, it always increases to violence.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, it's always at the cost of you, always.
yes,
And they're going
always.
to expect the emotional labor to be on you. There won't be repair. You'll have to suffer the shame or the anger that they provoke. And there's not going to be a meeting of the minds or the meeting of the souls. These relationships don't leave you feeling stable. They often are very destabilizing.
Yeah. And they feel very entitled to con continuously punish you and blame you for it and destroy your life, your relationships, all anything they possibly can, your finances, your ability to work, your ability to move and breathe freely or
Yeah,
even speak.
yeah, yeah,
They do
yeah.
do that.
They do rob us of our the best parts of ourselves. That yeah. You know, when I got out of the relationship, I felt a lot of shame, and I it cost me financially, it cost me my self-respect, it cost me some of my integrity. I felt really bad, and I remember saying to my sons, "You must be so ashamed of me." You must, and I it literally started. I fell into my lap weeping, just
Yes.
feeling so broken. And my oldest, he was like in his early 30s at the time, and he said, "No, Mom, he used your best qualities against you." So
Good.
that's what we need to understand is that they're very good at that kind of it's almost like a vampire in a way. You know, I think
Yeah.
about that. That's it. They're very is a very parasitic aspect to these relationships.
Yes, they invert reality where they
Yeah,
put your traits on as theirs and relocate all of theirs into you.
exactly. You
And
got
then
it.
get everybody in their orbit to believe their story
Yes. Yep.
with impunity.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's amazing. They're very good
It's
at that.
it's it is demonic. It's vile.
It's yeah. It's how people like Epstein and Diddy go so long.
Yes. Yeah,
It's
because they've got
really, I mean, you end
everybody
up
like a
thinking,
puppet
how
on their
could what
string.
exactly like it's so atrocious. Why wasn't that called out faster? Well,
Right.
because they're very good at hiding it, and they're also
Yeah.
very good at weaponizing power.
Yes. Power, control, the narrative they've got
Yeah,
because they have no problem lying. It's
exactly. Or scaring, intimidating you. Yeah, exactly.
exactly. So that's where they operate from at all times, and there
Yeah.
is no humanity about it. So
Yeah, no, it's very selfish.
yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
Thank you so much today, Carrie. I appreciate you so much for your time and your expertise and shedding light on this subject. And if you would please let everyone know where they can find you and learn more about this and even seek help if they
Yeah,
need it. Because a lot of people are in these situations and they have absolutely no idea who they're friends with,
right.
who their friends or family are, like who they're working for. But this will clarify any amount of confusion because we know confusion is the
Yeah.
first.
It is. Confusion is fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If confusion is your biggest indicator something's wrong. So
Yes.
to learn more about me, you can first of all find me on social media, pretty much everywhere at Kerry McAvoy PhD.
Yes.
And then my website, it's kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I appreciate this so much, Heather. Thank you for doing this today.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I appreciate you so much.
You're welcome.
You're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So do you know how to turn off the recording?
Yeah.
Okay. There, that same button
Oh,
that
is that
you,
I'll just hit pause.
yeah, yeah.